Greetings and welcome to Information, Entropy, Language, and Life, the struggle against randomness. This is going to be a story of scientific discovery in the age of information. And this is really about the foundations of information theory and where all the stuff that we're using right now all came from. With that said, let's get started. So, we're going to be talking about the birth of a new science. And before we get started, actually, I want to remind everyone that we will have the talking chat enabled. So if you have comments to make, just type them in the chat and we'll be able to answer, comment, clarify as we go along.
The tribe says, hit the like.
Yes, indeed. And it will read it on the screen too. Let's get started. So out of the ferment of scientific activity during World War II, an entirely new science was born. This was not simply a redefinition of a vague word, but the creation of information theory, a framework making it possible to examine intractable problems from a higher vantage point of knowledge. The laws and theorems of this science simulated exciting ideas across diverse fields. Biology.
Austin Murphy 11 says, am a gay robot.
No, you're not. All right, here we go. Greetings to you, Officer Murphy, and here we go. This is going to be a pretty interesting presentation here, and we're going to go over some pretty interesting characters through from wartime to now. So let's go through this here. The biology, the experts in biology, language, probability theory, psychology, philosophy, art, computers, and the study of society. So that's a lot of diverse fields there, like the principles of energy that revolutionized engineering. Information theory opened windows onto a domain as broad as nature and as complex as the human mind. So onto a whole new domain. Biologists and philosophers suggested that this universe and living forms are based on chance, but not accident. So what we're saying here, they're based on chance, but not accident. So this is something that comes from entropy, but not by accident, not random. Forces of chance and anti-chance. What's that? Determinism, right? Coexist complementary. Entropy, the agent of chaos, versus information, which exploits uncertainty to generate new structures. What do we mean by that? Exploiting uncertainty to generate new structures. Well, the creativity comes out of the unexpected. So the uncertainty is what generates something new, the creativity. All right, let's move along. So that brings us to this grammatical universe. So out of our normal physical immediate universe, we've created a grammatical universe. The proper metaphor for life may not be rolling dice or spinning a roulette wheel, but the sentences of a language, conveying information that is partly predictable and partly unpredictable. Just like the sentence will have punctuation in a predictable spot, the content can be very unpredictable. These sentences are generated by rules which make much out of little, producing boundless wealth of meaning from a finite store of words. Familiar, yet surprising. Constrained, yet unpredictable. Information theory suggests that order is entirely natural. Sense and order can prevail against nonsense and chaos. The world need not regress toward simplicity and uniformity, but may advance toward richer, more complex structures. Wow, so this is the fact that order and more complex structures will eventually advance without needing to regress towards simplicity here. So grammatical man inhabits a grammatical universe. So the sense and order can prevail against nonsense and chaos. And that it's entirely natural for these more complex structures to evolve. So that's an alignment with the natural universe. Here, the information, a universal principle, What connects spacecraft codes, DNA molecules, musical scores, and human conversations? That's information, a single concept linking diverse ideas, revealing its generality and power. A third component of nature, alongside matter and energy, is information. Nature must be interpreted as matter, energy, and information. A theory of information becomes essential for any complete explanation. So we're not looking at just a description of nature, but an explanation. An active agent shaping reality. So information is actually taking a performative aspect and shaping reality. Information gives shape to the shapeless, specifies the character of living forms, and determines patterns of human thought, spanning computers, physics, molecular biology, and communication. So the information giving shapes is the symbols that we use. Gives shapes, specifies the character of living forms, gives meaning to the things that we see and perceive with our senses. Through the information universe here, we can give it different characters or ascribe characters that we all can rely on. All right, let's move along. Information through the ages. Back in medieval times, information meant news, facts, and knowledge, but it also carried an active meaning, something giving form to matter or mind, a force shaping conduct, training, instructing, and guiding. So that was the information I need. How do I get to that village? What's the best route to travel? How do I, forge this steel? That's basically what you would have information for back in medieval times. But once we got to the 1940s, information was defined as a precise scientific term, which we're going to get into now, unlike any dictionary definition. Yet by being described mathematically, it became increasingly fascinating for non-scientists, recapturing older meanings. Non-scientists usually meaning philosophers in this kind of context, but I digress. The new view here is information emerged as an active agent informing the material world, as genetic messages instruct cells to build organisms, or radio signals guide spacecraft through space. So as an active agent, saying that information, ideas, and symbols are actually informing and forming the material world. Information became a universal principle at work in the world, giving shape to the shapeless and helping determine the patterns of human thought. Patterns of human thoughts. Information and noticing patterns of human thoughts. So there's a difference between patterns and mathematical representations of human thoughts and actual human thoughts like intuition, which there is a distinction. We're going to continue and get closer to noticing these fine lines of discernment. The age of electronic communications. Information became a scientific concept when electronic communications dawned in the early 20th century. Scientists did to it what their 19th century predecessors had done to energy. So we have theory, laws, and equations. They fashioned it into a rigorous framework, wringing out as much vagueness and mystery as possible. So again, getting rid of the mythical parts and getting it more so we can get some just the representative to the performative aspects here. Practical success. Color television transmission, early warning radar systems like over-the-horizon radar, which when you think about it, it's how do you do this? Recovery of intact messages from distant spacecraft or satellites, however it may be. In its pure form, information theory was an engineer's discovery, but its implications extended far beyond engineering into fundamental questions about the nature of reality. So we're getting to the nature of reality. but at the same time, we're creating our own universe of information. Interesting. Let's move along. All right, now we get to the one of the most exciting characters in information theory. Some call him the father of information theory, Claude Shannon. Back with this paper he wrote, I think, for Bell Laboratories in 1948. I think it was a mathematical approach to information theory. I think was the name of it. But regardless of what the name of the paper was, it described what we're about to go through here right now. And for those of you here, just to remind you that we do have talking chat enabled. And that means that whatever you type into the chat here, it should read it back to us here on screen and display it into the...
The crime says, hit the like.
Yes, indeed. So there it is. Please participate if you're here with if you want any clarifications or if there's anything else you need to add to the presentation. Let's continue. And just to remind you, at the end we will have a special surprise, so be sure to stay to the end. Now we're going to talk about Claude Shannon's breakthrough. This was in July and October of 1948. It was published in the Bell Systems Technical Journal. Shannon presented theorems dealing with sending messages quickly, economically, and efficiently from one place to another. That sounds simple, but 1948, we're talking about wartime, we're talking about interception of signals, things like that. So messages need to be sent quickly, economically, and efficiently from one place to another. There's universal laws here by treating information in abstract terms. What do we mean by in abstract terms? We're getting into the arithmetic here and the mathematical models of information. So by treating the information in abstract terms, Shannon generalized it, establishing laws that hold good for all kinds of information everywhere. Like Newton's laws of motion, Shannon's laws are universal. So that's in every domain. But Shannon's warning in 1956, he was uneasy about the glamour surrounding the subject. Shannon cautioned that information theory has perhaps ballooned into an importance beyond its actual accomplishments. Yet it was clear from the beginning that the theory shed light on deep, fundamental questions. Shannon's work addressed common intellectual concerns: order and disorder, error and its control, possibilities and their actualization, uncertainty and its limits. So we get a lot from this: statistical process control, error correction, encryption. The startling discovery: Shannon's expression for the amount of information was of the same form as the equation devised in the 19th century for entropy, the tendency for all things to become less orderly. So we get into the, I guess, even the gas laws and such, and those kinds of physics here. The Victorian physics: entropy expressed energy's transformation towards disorder, disregarding its quality without diminishing its quantity. It suggested chaos as the ultimate destiny of all things. But Shannon's era, the same concept appeared in a new guise, suggesting a powerful analogy between energy and information. Entropy was the connecting link, unifying two worlds of thought, two eras. So there's a connecting link of the entropy, and we're going to find out what it is, because as we saw before, there's elements of unpredictability, elements of chaos, but also elements of creativity and generation. Claude Shannon, the man behind the theory. So his early life: he was born in Petoskey, Michigan in 1916. He was an undergraduate at the University of Michigan and then a graduate student at MIT. He had Princeton years in 1940 to 41. He was a research fellow under Herman Weyl, one of the great mathematicians and mathematical philosophers. Here, the notion of an information measure with an entropy form came to Shannon. So from 40 to 41, working with mathematical philosophers is when this whole idea came to him. The secret of development. Few scientists knew of the ideas Shannon was quietly developing. J.R. Pierce remembers asking Shannon about new theorems and requesting they be written down. The notebook is now lost. Pierce recalls, Shannon's theory came as a bomb. something of a delayed action bomb. Then the stock market correction. In the late 1950s, Shannon became interested in the stock market while working on partitioning independent time series, the market average being a prime example. He became skilled at trading. Wow, so he sold out to the stock market trading with his math skills. As we see, though, a lot of the researchers that were at the head of artificial intelligence development in the 80s ended up getting brought into the Defense Department for the Star Wars project and such, and taken off of different kinds of tasks and areas of research that probably would have led to a better use of the AI, so to speak. But I digress. Let's continue. So, Shannon's distinctive personality. He was quiet and self deprecating, very unassuming, slow to push ideas before the public, seemingly indifferent to applause, and famously unprolific. He was a perfectionist, though. He worked at a fast pace. Well, I guess that's why he didn't have a lot of people to push ideas to. They can't keep up with him. He could not surrender papers until perfected, and he would let work sit for 5 years. Man, he made sure that was perfect. Edward Moore observed he would wonder if he had made the right choice of a variable in an equation. Then, while still contemplating improvements, someone else would publish a similar result which was correct, but so lacking in formal elegance that Shannon would have been ashamed to have done such a shoddy job. Then Robert Fano recalled, there's a significant work he did in the 1950s that has never been printed. He doesn't want someone else to write his papers, and he won't write them himself. He doesn't answer letters. He doesn't like to teach, but his lectures are beautiful, jewels of all of them, spontaneous sounding, yet very carefully prepared. Wow. And then Shannon's gradual withdrawal. There was an MIT appointment in 1956. Robert Fano arranged for Shannon to come to MIT as a Donner Professor of Science. He had no taste for academic routine. Then the fading presence. By 1960 to 61, Shannon had begun to fade, seen less and less in his office. By 1963, he was hardly there at all. In Fano's recollection, in the late 1950s, he started playing the stock market. He became interested while working on an important scientific problem, the partition of an independent time series. Partition of an independent time series. The stock market average is a good example. Shannon tried to find techniques for separating various influences. I don't believe he got anywhere with the mathematical problem, but he became very good at playing the market. Or maybe he did, and he just didn't have it perfected well enough to publish it. All right, let's move along here to Norbert Wiener, another prominent figure in information theory, and he was also called the father of cybernetics. This is MIT in the wartime effort. Norbert Wiener, or Wiener. Two giants, two temperaments. As unlike as it is possible to imagine, Wiener was florid and eccentric, a blower of fanfares for his own accomplishments. Shannon had taken some of Wiener's courses as a student in the early 1930s. So Wiener was florid and eccentric. He was self-promoting. He needed continual reassurance. He was a poor listener. He was highly competitive. He avoided reading his rivals' work, and he sometimes failed to credit others. Whereas Shannon was quiet and unassuming, self-deprecating, secure in his work, a careful listener, non-competitive, worked in isolation, and meticulously credited sources. It was a curious relationship because Wiener's insight, 1947, before Shannon's papers, Robert Fano was working on his dissertation at MIT. Wiener would walk in, puffing a cigar and saying, "Information is entropy," then turn and walk out without another word. He had grasped something of the relationship. The review. Weiner wrote a review of Shannon's papers, but it suggested a curious lack of comprehension of what Shannon had accomplished. This apparent obtuseness may have been connected with Weiner's unusual and highly egocentric personality. Barbara Raisback, Weiner's daughter, said he was a very vain and complex man who worked best on his own. He had a feeling that if he failed to notice his competitors, they would just disappear. Also, he was afraid of using someone else's ideas inadvertently. Gordon Raisback, the son-in-law's understanding Shannon's results would have meant admitting that he had not already invented them himself. I heard him lecture several times on the information. Oh, this got cut off, but we heard enough about disparaging aspersions about Weiner. He was a child prodigy, though. He was ambitious, world-class mathematician when America had few. At age 4, he plunged into scientific reading. At age 10, he was an undergraduate student. At age 15, he received his degree, proceeded to study philosophy at Cornell. By age 18, he had completed his doctoral dissertation on the relationship between mathematics and philosophy. Well, I guess it's hard to criticize this guy. His father, Leo Weiner, was a Slavic languages scholar capable of superhuman intellectual exertion who coached young Norbert. After study sessions, Weiner would work in the family vegetable garden while his father read aloud from Tolstoy, selecting passages commending the ennobling effects of hard manual labor. Oh, Lord. Then there's Weiner's European education. There's Cambridge studies, traveling fellowships to Cambridge, studying under Bertrand Russell and G.H. Hardy, the number theorist. Hardy was a passionate believer in the purity of mathematics, that equations should be beautiful, that mathematics should not be used for worldly purposes. He wondered if Weiner's claim that physics inspired his mathematical work was not a pose. Weiner had a different view. Weiner did not share the belief that mathematics exists for its own chaste self. He deplored dividing knowledge into separate fiefdoms. He felt strongly that the abstract power of mathematics should also touch the real world of events and living things. Weiner regarded Leibniz, the 17th and early 18th century, as the last man to have had full command of all important ideas of his time. Weiner himself had very broad intellectual interest. He worked as a hack writer for the Encyclopedia Americana and as a reporter at the Boston Herald. Wow. So this guy really got around. And cybernetics, that's Weiner's enduring legacy. Cybernetics is the science of maintaining order in a system, whether natural or artificial. So the core principle, of course, this comes from cybernetics, which is steermanship. Actually, it involves sailing and making small corrections to stay on a course for a destination here. The core principle: since all things tend towards entropy and disorder, their random deviations must be corrected continually. That's it there. The random deviations must be corrected continually. This is accomplished by using information about the system's behavior to produce more regular behavior, keeping the system on course. So there it is. It's by small, slight adjustments of a tiller on a sailboat over a long period of time, the whole time, to keep it on course to its destination because of the randomness of the sea. That's where the term cybernetics actually comes from. The etymology, here we go, from the Greek word meaning steermanship, carrying the sense of stability and constant, correct functioning. Illness is entropic, irregular, and error, while healing is cybernetic, restoring order, correcting error. And the universal application. Cybernetics is a universal principle of control applicable to all kinds of organization, electrical, chemical, mechanical, biological, or economic. Economic, of course. It permits change, but the change must be orderly and abide by rules. And of course, we see that a lot, especially in manufacturing and mechanical and statistical process control. as it's applied to economics too. So the anti-aircraft fire control problem, the crisis, and we're not talking about fires in aircraft. In October 1940, 3 months after the bombing of England began, more than 10,000 rounds of ammunition were fired from 3-inch anti-aircraft guns for every enemy plane shot down over London. Wow, so 10,000 rounds out of a 3-inch gun for every plane. German bombers flew higher and faster than First World War planes. Existing weapons were nearly powerless. Then there was Bell Lab's dream. An engineer dreamed of an electrical gun sight to compute and predict where the plane would be seconds after the gun was fired, because it does take time for that munition to reach the plane. All the plane would have to do is just shake the wings a little bit, and wherever they were aiming, it's not going to hit. An intense research effort began using scientists from Bell Labs and MIT. The challenge? To hit a distant, waywardly moving airplane. A gambler's problem of making winning choices in circumstances arranged to be unpredictable. Gun crews couldn't aim directly at the plane. They needed to aim ahead by as much as 30 plane lengths. Two kinds of uncertainty bedeviled the British gun crews: radar signals distorted by random electrical interference, and pilots flying as idiosyncratically and unpredictably as possible to confuse the gunners. So we can see the problem here. It's hard to shoot down aircraft. Weiner's intense effort. Into this wartime work, Norbert Weiner threw all his intense, neurotic energy, drawing together threads of a working lifetime's interest in probability, uncertainty, and the highest density of mathematics, the discovery of order among disorder. The core problem was separating the orderly message from the disorder of unwanted electrical interference or noise. The weaker a radar signal becomes, the more it is contaminated by random noise in the atmosphere and receiver circuits. So the Weiner had marathon sessions. So working with this guy, oh boy, he popped Benzedrine pills to stay awake through all-night sessions that were not really necessary, and became alarmed at the likely effect on his severely limited ability to keep military secrets. I thought he didn't like. Oh, that's right. This is the guy who liked to talk a lot. The entire anti-aircraft fire control program was highly classified. Edward Poitras recalled, "We took Weiner around, tongue-in-cheek, led him by the hand as you would a young child. He was a very odd character. His connection with fire control was actually quite minor and peripheral. So he was more interested in the stuff, math going behind it, than the actual outcome of what was going on." So we have the mathematics of randomness. Now we've heard of Brownian motion, named after the 18th century botanist Robert Brown, who noticed pollen grains suspended in water jiggling continuously. The hotter the water, the faster they danced, but there was no telling which path any grain would trace. There was Einstein's insight that pollen grains are buffeted by countless invisible water molecules. That's that atomist theory. A grain is pushed this way and that, not directly by a single blow, but indirectly by the difference in the number of blows on various parts of its surface. This is found quite generally in nature. So Brownian motions inside of a liquid, the way things will randomly disperse. The statistical foundation, the mathematics, is based not on a simple cause and effect, but on chance and statistics. This fascinated the 20th century scientist. Weiner had no qualms about the idea of a dice-playing divinity. So Einstein said that God doesn't play dice with nature in general, right? But with Weiner, he had no qualms about that. He's like, yeah, he does. So randomness is part of the universe. At age 10, Weiner had written a philosophical essay on the theory of ignorance, based on the conviction that no mechanism as loose as the human mind can devise a theory which is perfectly finished and leaves no room for change. We saw this with Gödel also. All right, so the revolutionary insight. Noise in a radar receiver caused by random bunching of electrons or whatever was similar to Brownian motion, but more interesting. The sending and receiving of messages has much in common with Brownian motion. So the stochastic series here from the Greek stokos, to guess. A message, like the track of a pollen particle, is a sequence of events spread out in time. These events are not known completely in advance, but they contain an element of the unknown. Examples here are stock prices moving up or down. There's Claude Shannon during the trading. A sentence of English prose, obeying statistical rules, internally consistent, partly predictable, but containing something new and unexpected. That's the content of the sentence, right? Otherwise, there would be no reason to write it. Only the probable track of a pollen grain, only the probable fluctuations in stock price, only the probable arrangements of letters and words can be predicted. The mathematician considers not one future, but a multiplicity of simultaneous futures. So that's the mathematician that's going to consider that multiplicity of futures. And then you can determine probability of which one is most likely. That brings the death of determinism. From Newton's world, full determinism reigned. Given perfect knowledge of what an object is doing now, one can predict exactly what it will be doing at any time in the future. But in Weiner's world, a scientist can never have perfect knowledge of what part of the universe is doing at this moment. There is no hope of knowing for sure what its future will be. So it's always not for sure absolute. There's always a probability. Scientists must try to conquer uncertainty about the future by considering a range of different contingencies and assigning a suitable probability to each. Then he can say what may happen under this or that set of circumstances. And within this new framework, this is a clean break with determinism. At the time, it was a surprising discovery, but it helped establish that conceptual framework of information theory that burst onto the scene 3 years after the war. So we're talking the 1940s. This is where the big change happened. Instead of full determinism, we start to see now that there's no hope knowing for sure. So everything has to be a probability of an outcome. So a big change in the way things were viewed as far as society. It's an overall conceptual framework that had a sea change. The information requires uncertainty. So why would it require uncertainty if we're trying to get rid of that noise? Well, the classical theory of communication was deterministic Newtonian. It treated messages as single events. Weiner, like Shannon, decisively cut the chains of this old way of thinking. In ordinary conversation, information is conveyed when the speaker says something that changes the listener's knowledge. This means the listener is in a state of uncertainty as to what message he will actually hear. So, you, the listener, state. We say uncertainty rather than complete ignorance because he knows the message will be one of a range of possible messages. It may be improbable, hard to predict, or probable, easy to predict, but not impossible. Wow. A greater amount of uncertainty is resolved if the message is one of a large number of possible messages, and if it is one of the more unlikely possibilities. An actual message must be considered not in isolation, but in relation to all possible messages. So the actual message, because things can be misconstrued, The actual message must be considered not in isolation, but in relation. So, is the actual message being most clearly communicated in relation to other ones that may be considered? The Yellow Peril, Weiner's classified wartime report. So named in recognition of the color of its cover and the intimidating difficulty of its contents. The impenetrable mathematics. Weiner's technique was so rarefied that much of the report was impenetrable even for the most advanced technicians. It was actually written by Julian Bigelow from the notes taken as Weiner wrote on the blackboard in room 2224 at MIT. So Julian Bigelow is the one that actually wrote it. Unlike Claude Shannon, who was very meticulous. See, he wouldn't have a peril. He would have something very clear. Julian Bigelow says Weiner never became so directly practical as to discuss channel capacity, source entropy, or message coding, entities on which Shannon built his theory. His concepts consisted of Brownian motion, discrete chaos, and linear operators, more comprehensible to mathematicians than to communication scientists. All right, so he's a little bit snobby, it seems, but Weiner was more geared towards that type of mathematical uh, approach to theories. But the practical victory is before 10% of pilotless V1s were shot down by ground fire. So that was only 10%. And we saw how much they were spending, 10,000 rounds or so. Afterwards, though, 50% of pilotless V1s were shot down by ground fire. The American-designed electrical predictor for anti-aircraft guns went into service on the east coast of England in August 1944, less than 2 months after the first wave of German buzz bombs appeared. That's how large a role of Weiner played in his practical success is open to question, but he had come to a profound conclusion much earlier. It became clear to me almost at the very beginning that these new concepts of communication and control involved a new interpretation of man and of man's knowledge of the universe and of society. Big time accomplishment. Then there's a roller coaster of reception. There's an initial euphoria. Fortune magazine trumpeted great scientific theories like great symphonies and novels are among man's proudest creations. Within the last 5 years, a new theory has appeared that seems to bear some of the same hallmarks of greatness. The overreaction. Later, information theory was rated a disappointment. It was said to have led no great illuminations. Enthusiasm had perhaps been excessive. As we saw before that, developments in information theory and AI and specifically have gone through cyclic developments, periods where there be rapid developments and periods of stagnation. Then there's the maturation in the 1970s. Information theory began to mature and deepen, regaining earlier luster. See, this is part of that cyclic behavior of how it's developed and advanced. The most penetrating investigations into generic information structure came at this time, bringing important new perspectives on the unfinished theory of evolution. Shannon's papers were published only 5 years before Watson and Crick unraveled DNA's secrets at Cambridge. The double helix was revealed as an information system, though larger consequences were not explored for several years. So as you see here, those developments were stemmed off of information theory, which brings us to reinterpreting nature. Again, we have matter, energy, and information or order. Nature can no longer be seen as matter and energy alone, nor can all her secrets be unlocked with the keys of chemistry and physics. Brilliantly successful as they have been, a third component is essential. Of course, that is the information or order. As they say, that just the it's not just information, but also knowledge, because as it goes that the knowledge is what is orderly and cumulative. The information and data is just random and miscellaneous. The bridge between two worlds. There's Shannon's entropy equation, unified two worlds of thought separated by nearly a century. So we had the Victorian era with a steam engine, which is energy, brings work and heat. But the information age, we have the computer, which is information, which brings, as I said, knowledge and action. So by making that information orderly and cumulative, it becomes knowledge, which we can lead to action and changes and affect the environment. Entropy is the universal connection, though. In Victorian physics, entropy described energy's tendency towards disorder. But in Shannon's theory, the same mathematical form measured information's uncertainty. The steam engine and computer are linked by this universal principle. So there's elements of entropy and order between the two, but all these are actually measures of the amount of uncertainty or the measures of entropy. All right, well, that takes us to the best part of the presentation. We do our fun quiz here. Now, let me tell you how this works. We play this by putting in the number of the question in the chat and a letter of the answer of your selection after I read the question. So, for instance, if question 1, I would put in the chat the Arabic number 1 followed by the letter of my choice. Let's say it was D. I put 1 delta, and that would be my choice. Now, let's read the first question. Here we go. What does the term grammatical universe, or what does the grammatical universe metaphor suggest about order and disorder? Grammatical universe metaphor. Is it that A, disorder is the natural state, order requires constant effort to maintain? B, order is entirely natural. The universe operates by rules like language. C, order and disorder alternate in predictable cycles? Or D, the universe is fundamentally random with occasional patterns? So what does the term grammatical universe metaphor suggest about order and disorder? So is it that disorder is the natural state, or that order is entirely natural and the universe operates by rules? Any takers for question 1? Going once, going twice. We're going to move on to question 2, but you can answer to question 1 at any time. Going to question 2. Why is uncertainty essential to information transmission? Why is uncertainty essential? A, uncertainty allows messages to be encrypted for security. B, information conveys something only when it changes the listener's knowledge. C, random noise in communication channels creates uncertainty. Or D, uncertainty prevents messages from being too predictable and boring. So we have some simple distractors here, but what do you think about answer A here? Uncertainty allows messages to be encrypted for security. Or B, information conveys something only when it changes the listener's knowledge. Or C, random noise in communication channels creates uncertainty. Or D, the uncertainty prevents messages from being too predictable and boring. All right, any takers for question 2? This is a pretty hard one. Okay, we're going to question 3. How does information theory's approach to prediction differ from classical physics, from that Newtonian physics, determinism? A, it uses computers instead of mathematical equations. B, it considers multiple possible futures with assigned probabilities. C, it relies on random guessing rather than calculation. Or D, it assumes perfect knowledge is possible given enough data. So is that information theory's approach to prediction? How is it different from the classical physics? Is it because it uses computers, considers multiple futures, relies on random guessing, or it assumes perfect knowledge is possible given enough data? This is an easy one, guys. Anyone want to take a stab at this one? Then we're going to move on to the final question. Question 4. What connects the steam engine and the computer as symbols of their eras? A. Both were invented by mathematicians working on theoretical problems. B. Entropy, the same principle governing energy and information. C. Both transform raw materials into useful products. Or D. They represent humanity's struggle against natural limitations. So, what connects a steam engine and the computer as symbols of their eras? So, is it because they represent humanity's struggle against natural limitations? They are both invented by mathematicians. Entropy, the principle governing energy and information. Or C, they both transform raw materials into useful products. Any takers on question 4? We're moving to the final slide here with the answers. Here we go. All right, now the answer key. Question 1, what was the grammatical universe metaphor suggest? The answer was B. Order is entirely natural, like language generating meaning from rules. The universe operates by principles that advance towards richer structures rather than inevitable chaos. So orderly is entirely natural. 2. Why is uncertainty essential to information transmission? And the answer was B again. Information conveys something only when it changes the listener's knowledge. The listener must be uncertain about the message beforehand, otherwise receiving it provides no new information. So it has to be something that changes the listener's knowledge. So there'd be no purpose having this quiz here if it wasn't something that's changing your knowledge here by letting you know that these were pretty hard questions. But let's go on to question 3. How does information theory's approach to prediction differ? And what are we saying differing from? From the classical physics? And the answer was, of course, B. Unlike classical physics, assuming perfect knowledge yields predictions, information theory considers multiple possible futures with assigned probabilities, acknowledging uncertainty is fundamental. And finally, what connects the steam engine and the computer? And of course, the answer was B, entropy. Entropy links them. In the Victorian era, it described energy's tendency towards disorder. In information theory, the same mathematical form measures information's uncertainty. So, now it's a measure of uncertainty rather than a tendency towards disorder. All right, and that takes us to the end of the presentation of the grammatical universe. And the classical view of entropy implied that the structure is the exception and confusion the rule. The theory of information suggests instead that order is entirely natural. So the classical view, the structure is the exception and confusion the rule. That's meaning that entropy is where the tendency was. But the theory of information suggests instead that order is entirely natural. Grammatical man inhabits a grammatical universe. So that takes us to the end of the presentation. For those of you who participated on your own, I hope you all get good responses there. Answer B to all of the questions. And from that, I hope you learned a little something on this. This takes us around full circle to what we've been studying here with logic and the philosophy of law and information theory and artificial intelligence. And you can see here where the convergence of all this comes and that struggle against randomness applies. That said, salute to you all for being here, and I hope to see you all on the next one. Peace out.
The crime says, hit the like.